Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into one of the most fascinating, emotionally charged, and frankly, shocking historical narratives you'll ever find in ancient texts. We're opening up the first 4 chapters of the book of Hosea. Now, this isn't just some dry historical account you'd snooze through in a classroom. It's a profoundly intimate look at a real, deeply troubled marriage that actually serves as a mirror for an entire nation's soul. So get ready, because we're unpacking the wild story of Hosea and Gomer, and what it tells us about divine love, betrayal, and ultimate restoration.
Here's a quick roadmap for our journey today. First, the prophetic marriage. Then, Israel's spiritual adultery. Third, the price of redemption. Fourth, God's legal case. And finally, we'll wrap up with timeless living lessons.
All right, before we jump into the specific chapters, we kind of need to set the stage and understand the scriptural context. You see, the book of Hosea uses a real flesh and blood human relationship to teach us something massive. God essentially tells the prophet Hosea to live out what we'd call a living parable. His marriage is going to be this physical, breathing illustration of God's relationship with the ancient nation of Israel. It's an incredibly intense approach to teaching, but it guarantees people will pay attention, right? Because it involves heartbreak, scandal, and ultimately a kind of redemptive love that just completely defies logic. Okay, let's dive into section 1, the prophetic marriage, looking at Hosea chapter 1. So, the story kicks off with a command that is honestly completely shocking. It presents this massive, glaring contrast. On one side, we have Hosea, who represents God's relentless, unyielding love. And on the other side, we have Gomer, an undeniably unfaithful woman. And God literally commands Hosea to marry her. You might be wondering why. Well, it's because Gomer represents Israel's spiritual adultery against God. God is using Hosea's very real, very painful heartbreak to show the people exactly how he feels about their betrayal. It's a literal living parable revealing God's absolute heartbreak over his people.
But this living parable doesn't just stop at the wedding altar, it carries right on with their 3 kids. Chronologically, God gives each of these children a very specific name. And these aren't just unique monikers to help them stand out. They actually carry severe, heavy prophetic warnings for the whole nation.
Take the firstborn son named Jezreel. Now, on the surface, this is a terrifying warning. The name Jezreel points straight back to the Valley of Jezreel, which was infamous for the bloodshed committed by King Jehu. By choosing this name, God is basically declaring that he's going to avenge this blood and bring judgment upon the house of Israel. The name literally translates to God scatters. But, and here's the brilliant dual meaning, the exact same word also translates to God plants. How wild is that? So embedded right inside this severe warning of coming judgment is a hidden, beautiful promise of future restoration. God will scatter them, yes, but eventually God is going to plant them again.
Things get even darker with the next 2 kids, though. The second child, a daughter, is named Lo Ruhama. Tragically, this means no mercy. God is stating loud and clear that Israel has completely exhausted his patience through their persistent idolatry. He's saying he will no longer have mercy on them. Then comes the third child, a son named Lo Ami, meaning not my people. I mean, that is devastating. It's the ultimate rejection, a harsh declaration that the covenant relationship is officially broken. God is basically saying, you aren't my people anymore, and I am not your God. And yet, even in the midst of this darkness, the source text notes a tiny glimmer of hope, a promise that one day, in the very place they were called not my people, they'll be called sons of the living God.
Let's transition to section 2, Israel's spiritual adultery, moving into Hosea chapter 2.
Here, the focus shifts just a bit. We move from the messy physical marriage of Hosea and Gomer directly to God's specific accusations against the nation of Israel. God lays out the evidence of Israel's betrayal so clearly. He points out how they actively pursued Baal worship, acting exactly like a spouse chasing after other lovers. And it gets worse. They actually credited those false gods for the very blessings, like their grain and wine, that God himself provided. They completely forgot the Lord who originally delivered them from Egypt. They even took his literal gifts of silver and gold to build their idols, and they were busy celebrating pagan festivals instead of honoring their true God. It is just a complete top-to-bottom betrayal of the relationship.
But God doesn't just list off the crimes and walk away. He outlines the discipline. God says he's going to bring Israel back into the wilderness. And I want to pause here for a second and ask you, how does God use seasons of wilderness to actually draw us back to himself?
You see, the wilderness in this text is a place where Israel is totally stripped of all those false comforts, all those false lovers they've been chasing. Just like they wandered for 40 years learning dependence on God way back in the past, this new wilderness becomes a necessary classroom for spiritual renewal. It's absolutely discipline, yes, but it's a discipline that's entirely driven by love.
Which brings us to section 3, the price of redemption, looking at Hosea chapter 3.
We've hit the emotional climax of the story right here. 15. In chapter 3, God tells Hosea to do the unthinkable, go back and love Gomer again. But she has fallen so incredibly far that she is literally being sold on a slave block. And Hosea steps up. He buys his own wife back for 15 shekels of silver and a homer and a half of barley. Now, to put that into perspective, that was the going rate for a slave back then. It's a shockingly low price for a human life. It represents absolute rock bottom. Hosea pays the full price to redeem her, not because she's inherently worth it at that specific moment, but because of his unbreakable, relentless covenant commitment to her.
And this isn't just a powerful ancient story, it brilliantly illustrates a much broader theological truth. This historical, deeply intimate act of purchasing a slave points straight forward to the ultimate redemption. Like the New Testament states in 1 Corinthians, you were bought at a price. Just as Hosea purchased Gomer out of slavery, the source material draws the direct parallel that Christ pays the ultimate price for redemption. God redeems his people not because they somehow earned it, but purely out of his profound, unexplainable love.
But redemption isn't instantly followed by a huge celebration party. Chapter 3 prophesies that Israel will abide many days without a king, a prince, or a sacrifice. They enter this intense period of waiting. Now, it's absolutely crucial we understand this waiting period correctly. Being stripped of their political leadership and their religious rituals definitely represents divine discipline, but it is meant for purification, not abandonment. God is taking the time to carefully prepare his people for a true, deep, lasting restoration. Moving right along to section 4, God's legal case, stepping into Hosea chapter 4. Suddenly, the tone shifts completely. We're plunged right into a gripping courtroom drama where God is acting as both the prosecutor and the judge in his controversy with Israel. God issues 5 severe charges against the nation. He declares point blank, there is no faithfulness, meaning broken covenant loyalty. There is no steadfast love. The Hebrew word there is hesed, meaning they've totally abandoned mercy. There's no knowledge of God, which implies a willful, stubborn ignorance. Instead, the land is just filled with swearing, lying, murder, stealing, and adultery. It's a society in total, utter collapse, where bloodshed just continually follows bloodshed.
So you have to ask, who is to blame for this massive societal collapse? Well, God points directly at the spiritual leadership and their utter failure. Check this out. Because the priests rejected the knowledge of God, God rejects them from being his priests. Because they literally fed on the people's sins rather than correcting them, their own children will be forgotten. And because they completely failed to teach the law, their glory is going to be replaced by shame. The spiritual leaders completely abandoned their post, and the entire nation suffered the devastating consequences. This terrible lack of leadership allowed what Hosea calls a spirit of prostitution to just take over everything. And we aren't just talking about physical acts here. It's a deep, pervasive spiritual idolatry that completely corrupts the heart. It manifested as them consulting literal pieces of wood, wooden idols, instead of God, and making sacrifices on mountaintops. But at its absolute core, this spirit of prostitution is all about divided loyalties. It's about putting anything, whether that's wealth, pleasure, comfort, or status, before God in our hearts.
And that brings us to our final part, section 5, timeless living lessons.
Let's synthesize all of this. What does this ancient text actually mean for us today? Well, the absolutely crucial takeaway is that God's love relentlessly pursues us, even in our deepest, darkest moments of unfaithfulness. When we find ourselves facing the wilderness, we have to recognize that divine discipline is actually an act of love meant to purify us. True restoration is always on the table, but it requires genuine repentance. And, unlike those failed priests of Hosea's day, we are called to step up as a royal priesthood, offering worship without divided loyalties, worshiping in spirit and in truth.
Ultimately, the book of Hosea paints this staggering, heartbreaking, yet beautiful cycle of human betrayal, necessary discipline, and relentless redemption. It's a vivid reminder that God's ultimate goal is never destruction, but always, always restoration. There is a profound peace and an incredible grace waiting for those who turn away from their false idols.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to really chew on. If the story of Hosea and Gomer proves that God's love relentlessly pursues us, literally to the point of buying us back from our lowest possible moments of unfaithfulness, what is holding you back from fully returning to Him today? Thank you so much for exploring this with me, and I highly encourage you to keep digging into these incredibly powerful ancient texts.